Full disclosure, I am absolutely dead set against reparations. I don't think that they're fair. I don't think that they're legal. That's what we're talking about here, right? We're setting the stage for determining who eventually would be eligible for reparations, right? That's why we're doing this research.
Yeah.
You're funding the research.
Well,
okay. So we're spending $6 million to figure out who would get reparations. So I think we should probably first figure out some research on whether it is legal to give reparations. The member from the task force said you studied history. I hope you also studied constitutional decisions. This issue of reparations was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1988 when President Ronald Reagan signed into law federal legislation providing reparations for individuals who were forcibly placed into camps during World War II, Japanese Americans, by President Roosevelt. The legislation was challenged as unconstitutional on one side, that it wasn't permissible. The other side were individuals who were descendants of individuals who were put in the camps, who said that they were left out and that they should be provided with funds because they descended from Japanese Americans in the camps. The U.S. Supreme Court established in 1988, and by the way, this court decision was not from a conservative court, it was from quite a balanced court, some would say a moderate Supreme Court, that reparations can be provided only to an individual who directly suffered the harm at the hands of the government. In this case, being forced into a camp is a decision of the U.S. federal government, shamefully. The Supreme Court and lower courts also rejected claims by descendants for compensation because the descendants were not directly forced into the camps. Their ancestors were. How do you overcome clear Supreme Court case law that would prohibit reparations for descendants of slaves from the 1860s? And how would you respond to the argument some might be saying that this is all political theater, that you're getting people's hopes up that they're going to get money, and then when you're smacked with the law, the case law, the constitutional law, you get to blame a conservative Supreme Court? Is this all just like a expensive setup to that? Because I'd rather let people know, like, up front, you're not getting reparations, you're not getting the money because it's not lawful under federal anti-discrimination laws. So how would you respond to that argument? I understand the opposition's argument as to it not going far enough. I actually think we should not even go down the road at this point. But how would you respond to those issues?
Yeah, thank you so much, Assemblymember DeMaio, for that question. You know, and I believe that that is actually a question and debate for another bill at another time, because that's not necessarily what this bill is about. But if you are interested in understanding what the task force was actually tasked to do and what their recommendations basically were focused around, last year, when we talked about it, I always recommended for the members to actually read the report, or at least the executive summary, to really understand the scope of their work. And so it's not just about repairing the harms of slavery, it's about repairing the harms of slavery and also the systemic discrimination that came afterwards, which was actually at the hands of the state of California. But again, that's not what this bill is about, and I know we are debating this bill, but I strongly, strongly would hope, if you haven't, that you at least read the executive summary of the Reparations Task Force. We have a member of the task force here. It was lots of hours and years and time put in, and it's actually a really, really good read, and I do know that you enjoy reading. I would strongly recommend that you read that, and then we can have that conversation about the merits of actually giving out money at another time. But I think once you read it, you'll understand that repairing the harm of slavery and systemic discrimination that has occurred afterwards is not just about giving out money. It touches every aspect of society, legislation that we here in California passed, and also the things that we continue to do today. So it's more than just cash, and that's something that I have stated. That is something that the California Legislative Black Caucus has stated. I understand that you are not for reparations, and I respect that opinion of yours. That's not necessarily what we're discussing today.
So I will let you know I did read the report in full because
great.
I've actually been very critical of the report. The various elements that it said that we needed to pay out, various costs to taxpayers.
Well, it was much more than just that.
Understood.
Right? Yeah.
But your bill actually does relate to reparations. It's not about the systemic racism because you're dealing with genealogy going all the way back to people who are actually enslaved. So you're actually confirming my point.
No, what this bill does is if there are in the future restorative things specific for those, whether it's funding, educational things, whatever it is, and you're stating that you deserve this or that you need this because of the harms that you and your ancestors have encountered, how can you prove that you are truly a descendant of American chattel slavery?
Right, and again, that's why I'm raising this constitutional question of why spend $6 million on something to develop a methodology to identify people who the Supreme Court will not allow you to do an education program or to give cash payments because it would be discriminatory. You would have to set up a program that would be available to all, not based upon a special class. That's what the Supreme Court has ruled. That's the whole notion of the 14th Amendment, which is equal protection under the law.
Well,
and that's so important that we not spend $6 million on a methodology to implement a program that on its face is flying in direct contrast to very clear constitutional case law. I'd also say on systemic racism, the Supreme Court has also weighed in on these arguments people have made about, well, there's institutionalized racism, it's systemic. Again, the Supreme Court has been very clear. The government has an obligation to identify an individual, a specific government action against the individual, and a specific level of damage for compensation. I'm not sure that there are many cases that could meet that standard, even if you do the systemic racism side. I raise this important little fact, and this challenge, this legal burden, because whether you like a decision of the Supreme Court or not, or whether you like the application of the 14th Amendment or not, it exists for equal protection under the law. There's a reason why we have this standard, because it's about fairness and equity for all. And I am concerned, to those of you who support reparations, I am concerned that you are a victim of fraud. I'm concerned that you're being told something by elected officials that's not true, that's not going to happen. And I think that you need to understand the constitutional case law that these ideas are up against. You may not like the constitutional case law, but it is there. And so I would really encourage, perhaps before we see something like this, I've seen bills. I'm right now arguing with Ledge Counsel on one of my bills. They say, well, there's a federal law that we have a little issue with. I'd like to see our legislative council do its job as it relates to clearly articulated case law from the Supreme Court saying this is probably not going to fly.
Thank you, Mr. DeMaio.
Before advancing it. So again, to the author of the bill, those are the reasons why I oppose.
Thank you.
And if we can bring forward programs that are more income-based, there are a number of ways to structure programs, but the concept of reparations on these issues seem to fly in the face of that constitutional decision.